Welcome back. Oh my God. Welcome back to Elevated Thoughts. Today we're going to be talking about the upcoming 2024 election. Don't mind the hat. I'll be making another change shortly. We have very different viewpoints on many things.
But a lot of these issues are American issues. They're not Republican or Democrat issues.
So we on Elevated Thoughts wanted to come on here and talk a little bit about what is driving the decision-making process. Day after day, we're seeing polls that rank Harris ahead by 60, and then you refresh your screen and you've got Trump up 55. There's really no rhyme or reason to what's going on, and that's why today what we're going to cover is, well, let me start by sharing a quote by James Carville, Hillary Clinton and Obama advisor, who said, "It's the economy, stupid." That's how he gauges what people care about in an election. And that's the advice he had given to his people he was advising. And now, when we look at that, Mike, what do you think? Do you think that it's the economy, stupid, and that's really all that people care about? Or do we want to look a little bit further?
I mean, it certainly matters what's going on with your wallet or your pocketbook, right? If there's a lot less money in there and your quality of life is becoming more challenging to maintain, people are going to remember that. But I just think it's funny when you ask the question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? The people who are voting for either candidate already have a solid answer, either yes or no. And it doesn't matter really what statistics or facts you can bring up with them. So I think it is a little bit more than the economic facts or what's at play here. It's definitely vibes and feelings.
That's right. If I'm wearing this hat, I'm going to tell you the economy is doing great. But if I'm wearing this hat, I'm going to tell you how much of a difficult time I'm going to have. And it does seem like that's really one of the few things. So I was telling you earlier, I was listening to Pod Save America. Forgive me. And let me just say that this is where I heard that statistic of 60% Kamala and 40% polling for Trump. It knocked me off my seat. I don't know where they got those numbers. In fact, I'm going to look it up so I can link them down below, because I have a feeling these are very slanted numbers. It's probably the Save America campaign that they run themselves. So, we can kind of, but anyway, what they said was, beyond that was even more alarming, was they went down the different demographics of what's turning on voters for Harris and what's turning on voters for Trump or turning them off. And there were two words. One of them was James Carville's word, the economy. If Harris says, we're going to focus on the economy, she's got the worst track record. The voter says, get out of here. Don't talk to me about the economy. And the same goes for the border. So what she had to do, according to Pod Save America, was fine-tune her pitch. Talk about the dreamers. Talk about how Republicans want to separate kids from their families, or talk about how medical prices, we're going to bring those down to fight inflation, or gas prices specifically. She's got to target the emotional responses. But if she does these broad swaths, well, as I put it, the constituency is kind of smart enough to see through it. How do you respond to that, Mike? Do you think that it's important that she focuses on the broader picture, or is it okay to just kind of hammer in?
I think it does speak to the weakness of her as a candidate, especially from a policy perspective. And I don't even want to say from an experience standpoint. I think that a lot of the pundits and the campaign managers learned something from the Hillary Clinton 2016 election against Trump. And too many specifics, too many policy, talks are going to go either right over people's heads, or they're going to make you a liability because they're going to hold your feet to the fire on this particular thing. And it gives the opposition more ammunition to work with. So I think Kamala's best strategy from this point on is really to just work on feelings and the vibes, because that's really what's best working for her besides policy discussions.
Well, lately, as we've seen, she's opened the door, and I don't know if this is a response to the polling that she's seen or the reaction that she's gotten from the voters that they are talking to, but she's kind of opened the door. I think she's going on the news with Bret Baier, which I guess is considered an unfriendly. Those of us on the far right might say, I shouldn't say us, but those on the far right might say that Bret Baier is more of a moderate, and that won't be such of a tough interview for her. But it shows that she's changing course, right? She's kind of course correcting because what's happening isn't working. There's one other thing that she does that I think we should talk about, and it's that she's breaking from Biden on support for Israel. Now, it doesn't have to do with the border, and it doesn't have to do with economy, but as we know, it's not only about the economy, stupid. We need to look across our border, and things are definitely heating up in the Middle East. So this week, Biden administration sent a THAAD rocket defense device over to Israel. The United States only has 7 of these devices, and now we've got 6. And we sent 100 soldiers over there to go operate this machinery. It's set up, it's operating imminently, as far as we can tell from the news reports, and it's meant to supplement the Iron Dome, I guess, if that's the right way to say it, because Hezbollah is bombing them from every angle, and it's overwhelming the dome. Right. So I guess the theory is that this is defensive. But Mike, before I let you share your thoughts here, what if Hezbollah shoots a rocket and it hits a U.S. service member who's stationed in a war zone now in Israel?
I think that's part of the strategy, is kind of a deterrence, and it's a matter of, you attack this site and you injure American soldiers, then you are going to draw American response to it, which is potentially much more heavy-handed than just what Israel can muster.
But that sounds like someone who's going to jump in front of a car in a crosswalk.
It's not unprecedented before, for either UN peacekeepers or the U.S. to simply place troops there, as we've done with the Iranian attacks in the past. It's to let them know that we mean business. Well, we're not here to escalate and start a war, but by all means, if you come start swinging, we will swing back, is the measure that they're trying to send.
Yeah. Well, I guess Hezbollah has been all out, and that's really what the idea is. In fact, I've seen some positing that because this THAAD is here, they're kind of gearing up for something. Well, why would Iran send massive attack into Israel now? Maybe as a retaliation of something that's even larger to come. So over the next couple of days, that's definitely something that I'm going to be talking about and looking at. But again, the Kamala Harris campaign has this very large swath of, dare I say, Hamas supporters. I don't know how you could level that or be that, but maybe they're humanitarians for Gaza. You help me understand what they're doing.
So the Harris campaign is really trying to thread a needle here. What she's trying to do is she's trying to pick up Haley voters, those kind of centrist Republicans, or even neocon old guard folks that feel pushed out from the populist changes in the GOP party, and that's why she's going to Bret Baier. That's that particular audience. Those are the people who tune into there. And then she's also trying to preserve, the younger millennials and the Gen Z who are more concerned about the Palestinian end of the conflict and their suffering, that's involved, that are much more vocal about that. So, but it's difficult because I do see within the DNC and centrist moderate Democrats looking to the progressive vote and just, wondering what the cost was. They've alienated a lot of the general voting population by trying to have more progressive policies, but they're so finicky and fickle. They won't show up at the ballot box when you need them the most. So it's really kind of a damned if you do, but damned if you don't. So she's trying to thread that needle to preserve those bases, because at the end of the day, I don't think any minds are being changed at this point. It's really just those people who say they're independents, either not going to vote at all in my mind, or they're not going to be enough to sway the election. It's the voter participation. It's getting enough people to turn out to vote, I think, is going to be the difference in this election.
Yeah, and the way that they accomplish that is through fear-mongering and emotional responses to this kind of stuff.
Emotions. That's what gets people to show up at a ballot box, is emotions.
Yeah. Well, the reason that we're talking about foreign affairs is actually because of an article in the Foreign Affairs periodical. And what they said was that polling shows 60% of voters prioritize domestic issues, like we started, right? But it's the remaining 40 are now that's presumably prioritizing something else. And when we look at Trump's stance, it's deterrence by strength, right? That's how he wants to do it. Portray this strong American, portray these harsh consequences if they ever cross us. And based on that, we achieve peace, because how could you ever cross it? Peace by strength. That's the slogan. Now, Harris, and by proxy and extension right now, the Biden administration, they don't lead, in my opinion, through strength. Even plopping defensive weaponry, plopping billions of dollars, plopping troops, that may act as a slight deterrent. But the fact is, there's no diplomacy going on. We've talked about this so much. We're ignoring Russia and Ukraine and letting them have a war of attrition. Who can spend more dollars and have more men die, frankly, rather than going and saying, hey, how can we finish this? So that I can understand why 40% of voters are saying we need to look at this differently here, because, well, what's the alternative, right? Dude, in 2001, we had an attack on the homeland. In World War II, we dropped a nuclear bomb on Japan. If you go to a Japanese right now and ask them if they think they're going to be bombed on their homeland, they actually probably have an answer like, well, actually we could. If you ask an American, they're gonna be like, oh, absolutely not. Well, we're down to 6 of 7 THAADs. Okay. We're at multiple wars. Oh, it could happen, guys. It could freaking happen over here. And that's what's so scary.
I think what it is it speaks to the need to really look at our institutions. And that kind of really ties into the feelings of what's going on in this election, because there's a great distrust in our institutions. Some of it's merited, some of it's not. And when it becomes the opposition is not the loyal opposition, but they're the enemy and they're here to destroy America, it becomes counterproductive. And I think that our adversaries either kind of follow the adage of never let your enemy know he's making a mistake, and sometimes just let them run the course like that. Or at the same time, it doesn't take much to push levers and just tiny little buttons here or there to ramp up the discourse in our free speech and democracy, right? Because if you think about what goes on in Russia and China, they have a much more, control on the flow of information with inside their country. They must think it's laughably easy to manipulate the conversation in this politics. And I think I brought up to you by text the other day a joke. I used to like to derail World of Warcraft world chat conversations when it just became too much woke, anti-woke, just bitter argument nonsense. And that's why we're playing video games, right? Is to escape. I'm not here to, talk about real world politics in there. I would always derail the conversation with, hot dogs or sandwiches, and you're stupid if you think otherwise. And that's all it took to just all of a sudden take it and turn it into a 180. So it really doesn't take too much to manipulate the conversation. But as we could see, when you already take a general and perhaps healthy skepticism of our institutions, it doesn't take much to ramp that up. And obviously, our adversaries would love nothing more for us to get rid of all these institutions that stand in the way of them being able to do mostly what they want to do.
Well, you brought up the institutions. I wasn't going to do it. And you brought up free speech. Again, we weren't going to go there, but now we kind of have to. So in the 2016 election, we had how do I say this, a hoax peddled that the institutions of our federal government and our intelligence communities and our social media platforms all came together, and media sites all agreed, well, Trump worked with Russia in 2016. There's the dossier. And I'm going to just definitively say, and you can disagree with me, that it was completely proved a hoax. The Mueller report proved definitively. The Durham report proved definitively that the Mueller report was BS. So, and we keep going down and down this route. When now we have 2020, and we have organizations like CISA, and we have organizations like the Election Integrity Project. We have the Department of Homeland Security labeling American citizens as domestic terrorists because they're questioning what an election outcome was based on real legitimate concerns that are being pushed by a sitting president. This to me is the mixed messaging, the censorship. Mark Zuckerberg admitted on Joe Rogan that the federal government reached out and pressured, block the laptop story. We don't want this getting out. Mark Zuckerberg admitted he wrote a check, $400 million. He gave it to Stacey Abrams to go and register and harvest ballots in Georgia. Like the amount of spin that went into the 2020 election is unbelievable. And they're not even telling us what's happening in 2024. They're not even telling us. I bet you it's happening. I bet you it's happening twice as bad. And I guess this is your opportunity to tell me how badly it's happening, but maybe on the other side of the aisle.
Yes, so that's the thing, is I think our recent Twitter experiences really speaks to how quickly disinformation spreads. And there's two specific examples. There's the whole FEMA incident, but then also the FEMA budget and what's going on with that. So there was the whole FEMA response, and there was these allegations, conspiracy allegations that spread like wildfire, that FEMA was confiscating supplies and shutting help out. And as we saw, it was more of a crisis management situation where you have a corps of engineers clearing a road, and some guy shows up on his ATV with a chainsaw saying, hey, I could cut down and do some, work to here, help you guys out. And he goes, that's all right. We got enough chefs in the kitchen right now. We just don't have use for your set of hands here. But it's taken as, they're rejecting help, confiscating supplies, which was an interesting to me, because FEMA doesn't accept donations. All of that like supply contract occurs before the disaster happens. And now the big, a claim against FEMA being bankrupt, and we have no money because we gave it all to those illegal immigrants. And this is something that spread very, very quickly without people really, hammering down on the numbers here. And it's really important to distinguish the different sections of the budget that FEMA receives every year, and they're appropriated by Congress. So it's not like FEMA or the president gets unilateral authority to spend it as he sees fit. When you look at how easily that kind of disinformation and misinformation. There's two different types. Misinformation is more accidental, whereas disinformation is intentional. I think a lot of people enjoy the audience capture, or as I spoke about before, there's plenty of foreign state actors who could just relish this opportunity to stir some crap up online, people who are easy to latch onto these stories. But this is where I get concerned, right? So these institutions look at how this kind of disinformation and misinformation could spread. You have Republican governors and mayors on the ground who have every incentive to call out President Biden or the Democrats or FEMA for not doing what they're supposed to be doing, like what happened to Katrina. It's not to let FEMA completely off the hook. They're not perfect.
Sure. No, but you had them complimenting them in North Carolina.
Exactly. So the thing is, it's, we have to be careful because this kind of information is very dangerous when it spreads, and I don't know how to combat that, right? It reminds me of the lessons we learned from our 9/11 series, which, plug it here, definitely go back and watch that. But what we had was a bureaucratic apparatus that was not designed for the needs of the future that were emerging, the threats that were emerging at the time. I don't know if we have the bureaucratic apparatus that's ready for it. So speaking to those articles, I did dive into a little bit about them. You saw the CISA cooperation with an organization that is CIS, which is essentially the same name, just not a governmental organization.
Well, they spun it off.
It's an NGO, and it's already kind of what happens now. The defense industry used to lead innovation and be the bleeding edge of breaking technologies, and now the private sector is either coming closer or sometimes surpassing the military and defense sectors, to where they have to go private to get these kinds of technologies. And really, AI and semiconductor manufacturing is going to be the realm of the private industry that powers the defense industry, and not those particular budgets. I don't know if you remember the History Channel Tactical to Practical, or Tactical to Practical.
No, what is that?
So it's just about military hardware, like how the Jeep came to be the car that we have and love today, started out as a military contract vehicle, right? So now our government is desperately trying to deal with this misinformation. And how do we stop it without giving an unwieldy bureaucracy too much power to trample over our civil, liberties? And that's really the struggle where we are today.
Well, when we talk about mis and disinformation, you use the word bureaucracy, which kind of is like grading like nails on a chalkboard to me. It almost feels like, okay, so bringing up this Carolinas incident again, I was on Twitter when I was watching, it was a former, I believe is a Navy SEAL or a Marine named Sean Ryan, and he had podcasts. He had other helicopter pilots who were privately contracted to fly supplies in, and they were told that they couldn't land their chopper. And again, to your point, that came out that, well, you can't land a chopper where we have all these supplies. There's videos of them blowing all the supplies and ruining them. So, okay, that makes sense. But the gentleman came on and he basically said, this is what's happening, right? So Sean Ryan did later in the week come on and issue a pretty staunch apology. In fact, he said that I let them say it. I admit it. It's not accurate, and I reject it, and I take it, or I rescind it, and I take it back. And I'm sorry he did that. So that it's good that he did that, but you're exactly right. The apparatus doesn't exist. So the other thing I saw was Elon Musk saying the exact same claims, that we're hiring and privately contracting supplies and helicopters, and they're not letting them land. So he actually tweeted at Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who said, this is not accurate, unprompted. And he tweeted, this is happening. I've got my people on the phone saying it's happening. And he got on the phone with Mayor Pete, or I should say Secretary of Transportation, Mayor Pete. And he, Mayor Pete. And he basically said, we solved it, right? So they came together, they put their heads together, and it actually came out to be a positive interaction there. And maybe that's how it works, right? It leads me to actually think of another point is in California now, it just came out that Elon Musk has been banned from any additional SpaceX launches. And they literally cite his political leaning in the ruling as to ban him. Mike, that has to be illegal. That has to be.
So this is the first time I'm hearing. I definitely have to look into it, but it surely doesn't sound good on its face. I think there's a reason why he's leaving California. There's a reason why a lot of people I know are leaving California. There is that healthy balance between, precautionary principles and policies, and then also strangleholding, the citizenry or industrial development. That's definitely a huge problem in that state there.
Well, he has been snubbed repeatedly, in my opinion, and I'm not a fanboy, to be completely honest. I like using his app, but I used it before him. And frankly, he's been snubbed, right? He's one of the leaders in EV technology. He goes about, and I'm going to tout that he gives his $45 million a month donation to the Republican super PACs, right? But he also goes on Joe Rogan and talks about how much carbon we're digging up from the ground and shooting into the atmosphere, right? So he he goes around saying that he's like one of the world's leading climate change activists in that way, because his companies have really moved the needle on this. And it's so strange that just based on fairly recently political activism, now he's being completely snubbed, and they're giving all of these, they're having meetings in the White House with all the other car manufacturers and not him. It's really kind of strange, and literally, I believe it's illegal.
It's what happens when you wade too far into politics and you are forced to do some sort of litmus or purity test, because there is no more bipartisanship anymore. That's why it's so difficult to do our show, right? This is a shunned example. People don't want us to see us be friends and find common ground on these things. So it's really unfortunate, because it does speak to the whole Buttigieg, Elon Musk interaction, that when people hate each other, they can still come together and get important things done when it matters most.
Yeah. And so help me understand this FEMA thing. So you were talking about the budget. So I understand that they have like $30 billion allocated each year. And now they estimate that the damages in the Carolinas is going to be upwards of like 150 or 200 billion.
That's right. That's right.
But that counts houses and commercial buildings, and is it insurance going to pay for that? Why would FEMA be paying for that anyway?
So it's part insurance, it's part federal relief, because, as a country, we have an invested interest in getting those citizens back up on their feet. Cynically speaking, when taxpayers can't afford to pay taxes, the system starts to break down. So it's the matter of getting the industrial and, commercial development back up again, so those people have a lifeline, because you could build their homes again, but if there's no businesses or roads, for people to get in, plumbing and electricity and stuff, that's just going to be a greater challenge for them to become productive members. But what happens with the FEMA budget is, like I said before, is there's multiple buckets within it, and they're all appropriated by Congress. So again, FEMA can't unilaterally decide like, okay, of our 30 billion, this is going here and that's going there. But the two big programs that I want to talk about are the DRF, the Disaster Relief Fund, which is, when people in Maui got the $650 immediate relief, and people in the North Carolina area, they got the $750 immediate relief. You then have to wait for more appropriations from Congress for further aid. So that's just to get you some money so you can hopefully get some housing or food and water and get the heck out of Dodge, for the time being.
It's a great point, Mike. And that's what some people go, $650. What am I going to pay my rent for a half a month? And you're totally not understanding if you say that, because, right, you also could see TikTok videos or videos online where it's people going, how am I supposed to evacuate? I have $15 in my bank account. I don't know anyone. I don't have a baby. I can't drive, right?
Right.
That $600-700 actually could make the difference. You find a hotel room, you buy a tank of gas, you buy your dinner, breakfast the next day, and all of a sudden you are into safety. So I think it's fair that we bring that up, and it makes sense, right?
What's also fair is a conversation about the Shelter Services Program, which is the other big controversial component of the FEMA budget. So this is another bucket item that's appropriated by Congress, and I think it was to the tune of about $640 million, no small number, but it's co-administered with Border Patrol. So these are people who are granted asylum, or they're captured at the border and they're awaiting trial. You have to put them somewhere. So this isn't necessarily, the immigrants that are in New York City and things like that, but it is a component of them. My answer to any other concerns about that would be, or rather question, would you prefer them not to be sheltered and tracked in some way? Would you prefer them to just be released, or you have no control over the border whatsoever? Again, $640 million.
Yeah, that's option A and B, right? But option C would be put them on the bus and put them back in Mexico, or remain in Mexico.
Absolutely is an option. But the thing is, the way the border works is that we need to capture as many people as we can, that are trying to come here illegally and not using the asylum process. But a lot of people also overlook the other ways to get into a country, is where you simply cross it on a tourist visa and you just overstay your welcome, which is the super majority of how people get here. They get here on buses, they get here on planes and other, ships, tourist means that they come to this country and overstay them. So I think it's looking at the problem from the wrong angle. And then when you look at $640 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but then you look at the whole budget being $30 billion, my apologies, stumbling over here. And then you look at the damages that are needed to work this area to recover. Just North Carolina alone, $150 billion on the low end. This is not what the FEMA budget is concerned with, right? Like, this is something that has to be done at Congress. And right or wrong, you have Congress, House Speaker Mike Johnson, who's not coming back into session until, in theory, after the election, they've done more assessments on it. So again, it's a little bit more political posturing here. It might be too soon for Congress to come in because there's really nothing to vote on specifically how much money they're going to give them.
Hmm.
But it's certainly a Democratic means to say, look, the Republicans, they don't care. They're not trying to come into session to talk about it in any way.
Yeah, well, if he doesn't go into session, it doesn't seem like anyone goes into session, right? So no one could vote.
Because there's a lot of other things that they need to get done in that session that he doesn't want to deal with. So that's why they're keeping the recess.
Is the border bill still being discussed? The Langford border bill?
There's a ton of bills that just aren't really going anywhere. And I mean, that's a whole nother episode about the deadlock and what goes on there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know they passed another continuing resolution, so woo!
Kick the can down the road another 3 months until we come to brinksmanship and 11th hour negotiations again.
For sure. I mean, hey, you said that the supermajority of immigrants come in by expired visas via, legal means. I didn't know that. I would have thought that the majority of illegal immigration is happening through the asylum program at the southern border. I would have bet my life on that one.
So we have quotas on the asylum programs, but when you look at how many, the estimates of how many undocumented folks get here, it's through coyotes that don't always take you through the border. It's through other, means.
I would not have thought that. In fact, I thought, looking at the metrics, that it was like 2 million encounters at the southern border every year, and that's how you equal up like the 5 or 6 million that they've come in throughout these 4 years. But I'm going to have to look closer at those statistics.
From personal experience, the many undocumented immigrants that I've known working in blue collar trade in my life, that's how they've gotten through, the border.
All right, let's talk about that as our last thing. So we both work in an industry where unions are very prevalent, but we also very much enjoy our automation. And in both of our industries, that's very important, right? So I imagine that in the recycling world, there's not somebody that is standing there anymore wading through the little parts, right? You probably have machinery doing that. And what we saw a couple of weeks ago was the longshoremen strike and the union that went out and, well, quickly fizzled away. It looks like they got a continuing resolution, for lack of a better word there. We're going to revisit it in January. I wonder why. Right. So I had gone on this kind of tirade and said, why can't we make machines do this? Let's find these folks new jobs. And this is something we talked about on our previous episodes where I don't remember what year it was 2012 or 2016, but Hillary Clinton famously told the coal miners, why don't we teach them how to code or learn how to code, coal miners? It seems funny to me that the Democratic Party is the one that kind of hangs their hat on the union support. And in this election, I don't believe they have it. I think it actually came out that a majority of the Teamster union came out in support for Trump, and that's maybe the biggest union.
That's incredibly telling indeed, yeah.
Yeah, but my point being, I don't know how I feel about this. I love that people work, right? We all talk about we want unemployment statistics low. We all want to create more jobs. But at the same time, I think we need to create more jobs for these folks in an industry that is going to last. Right.
So this is why I'm a big fan of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Chips and Science Act, is because these are all high-tech, high-value industries that hopefully are not outsourceable, right? They're domestic industries that will be here. And that is certainly a great challenge. I'll speak from the scrap metal and electronics recycling sector, is that the permitting is certainly a challenge. Where you're going to get your permit is a very narrow set of cities and areas within only a handful of states. So it becomes very challenging on where you can open up these businesses, which are incredibly important in providing critical materials that we need for the green revolution or just the tech revolution, whatever you want to call it. So to get these jobs and industries here, though, these are things that people want, right? So actually, a tweet I saw from you recently was an automated vehicle that was plucking crops from a field.
Yeah, cabbages.
And the thing is, there's this balance. Going to name drop Yuval Noah Harari, getting through his most recent book, The Nexus, which is really good. Speaks to a lot about the misinformation, disinformation, stuff that we talked about earlier. But he also talks a lot about AI. And for a long time, technology has always replaced jobs, but then there's been a steady creation of new jobs, either to maintain that tech or just as value is created in society or time is freed up, we can, do more things as we specialize. So we have new industries and services that open up. But AI is really a challenging, button in automation too. Is it because it's so rapidly eliminating certain jobs that you might only need 1 or 2 people where you needed 20, and that's hard to keep up with the pace of that. What do you teach your workforce in school, right? Like, 'cause that's the whole point of college, is to prep you to be a highly productive member of the workforce. So what can you teach people that in 4 to 6 years becomes obsolete, right? The idea of any kind of graduate or master's program is like, I don't know if I could study one thing for, that many years, because it's not going to be effective by the time I get to the job market. So that's something we need to deal with for sure. But you can't stop automation. You can't stop AI. You just have to prepare for it.
Well, that's why that deal was dead on arrival. I mean, they said they wanted to raise and they wanted to stop all automation. Like, you're going to lose that fight, guys.
Yeah, I just don't know how you stop those kinds of investments. You forcing a company to be less profitable. I can understand the profit sharing aspect, but you can't, eliminate their means to, make themselves more valuable and efficient as a company.
Well, it's almost deeper than that. These sports are like ubiquitous to society. You can't do without them, right? You can't have a group of people that have the ability to threaten to shut down the whole country. When the mobster gangster with the Cartier tinted blue glasses and the Bentley and the gold chain came on and he goes, no, we're going to shut this whole economy down. They should have taken the guy to jail, frankly, because he's not actually even helping his workers. Look what happened. He faded away. He's probably going to get fired. What he should be doing is talking to his workers about, here are all the other industries you guys can look at. You can't fix a sink with AI or remotely. Okay. You can't build a cabinet remotely. Maybe you could build it and then deliver it. But the truth is, you can move these friggin' Lego box containers really easily with machines, really easily. It's basically already that with 2 little joysticks.
So AI, machine learning, or any of the other buzzwords, algorithmic, etc., any of those other buzzwords, they will not replace us when they become perfect, right? We're not going to wait for that golden moment where either the self-driving car never has an accident. It will replace us immediately when it just becomes a little bit better. Because when an insurance company looks at it and says they're 7% safer, that's it. That's the threshold. And now you're going to immediately replace, all those jobs before, just because there's less risk involved and everything is, money driven or profitability driven. So I don't know how you could prevent automation, and it's like trying to stop the future. I don't know. To me, it just seems a little crazy. And
it's like anti-capitalist almost.
A little bit. Just a teensy bit.
What was Stalin's take on, right? He wanted to stifle it. The socialist utopia was built on steel and coal and loudspeakers, right?
Yeah,
they didn't want to go into semiconductors.
Communal agrarian projects and things of that nature until they realized you can't win wars with, that kind of mindset.
We must make the atomic bomb. Well, the truth is that what I'm going to leave our viewers with as we wrap up here today, and I didn't look into the validity of this, but I'm just going to float it because we're talking about semis. We're talking about floods in North Carolina. I saw an unverified article that claimed that there is a mine. I believe it's called the Silver Pine Farm or the Silver Pine Mine or something along those lines. They are the only producer of the ultra pure quartz that is needed for the lithography process to manufacture semiconductors. And as we know, and we've both been studying this, we're going to be talking about semiconductors a lot because it's so important in the age of information today and technology. But the semiconductor process to make it is basically fully outsourced now to Taiwan. They are making all of it. But the process that they use requires the high, purest quality quartz. And I'm getting too deep in the weeds here, but the United States is the only one that produces the high quality goods, and then they produce the high quality manufacturing. So if we can't produce the high quality goods, because if I'm thinking about what happens to a mine when there's a 12-foot flood of storm surge, I imagine the mine is going to fill up first. So now apparently they're not able to get this quartz. They're not able to make semis, and all the threats that mob boss shipyard man made, those are now going to happen in the semiconductor industry. So if you like the way that your car window operates with a little chip, or you like the way that you now have a TV on your refrigerator, that stuff's going to go away.
Yeah, well, it's definitely unverified. I don't know if it's verified. I don't know if it ever will be verified. I have to definitely look a little bit more into it myself.
We're going to have our viewers look into that for us. And please comment below. So if you know anything about this mine, let us know, because we're going to be looking into this as well. But Mike, today was an awesome one. We've got officially 3 weeks now until the election is going to come. Things are definitely changing. We're going to continue to do it. In fact, we have a special guest who is returning to the program because he is going to help talk about a little bit more historical context. That's a little bit of a hint who it is when we go into talking about what's going to happen on November 5th. But everybody on my side, stay vigilant. search for that fraud and irregularities and call them out and continue to press them. And Mike, what message would you give to everyone on your side?
Keep calm and carry on. And I hope to see you on November 5th, or I hope you're early voting or mail-in ballot voting.
November 5th, gentlemen and ladies, November 5th. That's when we vote. And Mike, thanks again. This has been Elevated Thoughts.